Hello, class. This uh, lesson is on political parties. And to give some background about political parties, the, the institution of political parties are not mentioned anywhere in our Constitution. It is not something that the founding fathers had instituted as one of the branches. And yet, political parties is probably the most broadly um, utilized institution in our American government. It touches all the spheres. Um, and it touches certainly the two branches of government, and it is not supposed to touch the judicial branch, but um, we still get a pretty good idea of the type of judge we're going to get because our judges are elected along partisan lines, even though they are not a political actor themselves. Anyway, so I just want to give you an idea that um, political parties touch every area of our political life in the public, with the public, amongst the public as they come together to decide the issues that they care about. In the electorate, parties matter. Once someone's in government, they coordinate based on party lines. And so there is just no getting away from political parties anywhere in government. So what are political parties? James Madison had written in Federalist Number 10 as he warned us about factions, and he was talking about the possibility of the majority being tyrannical, or even the minority being incredibly disruptive to the point that it disrupts democracy. But if you read this definition here, I think it defines a political party actuated by some common impulse or passion or interest adverse to the rights of other citizens. He's talking about two groups really fighting against each other, in tension with one another, and competing for positionality and power. Well, by that very definition, you could identify the Republican and the Democrat Party. Certainly, we are not a binary party government. We, for the most part, people running for office are running under a Democrat, Republican, Independent, Green, or Libertarian ticket. For the most part, we see one of five, but the two dominant parties are always Republican and Democrat. And the way we know this is because when all the primaries are done, we are usually deciding between a Democrat and a Republican at the federal level. Parties are also defined as a diverse coalition aggregating of people, of issues, of policies, all of which articulate the interest in and of the public. Me by myself cannot influence policy, but me and 400 others with checkbooks, with a website, with enough media, with enough money to influence, to get some spots on the media, to organize a protest in my city, aggregated together, we have power. And so political parties assume these various groups into their fold. It is an institutionalized coalition that's adopted a group of norms, rules, and procedures. Think about how political parties participate in the primaries, how they run a Democratic National Convention in order to officially nominate their candidate for president, for example. But in general, political parties at the local level to the federal level, their role is to make policy commitments to the public in the electorate during election cycles. They have to be willing and able to make good on their promises to the electorate. They need to be, once they get in office, they need to develop opposition when they're out of office, and they need to be different. So when the Republican Party assumes a position on a particular policy, the Democratic Party is supposed to be very different on their opinion of a particular issue. They're also a coalition of political elites. When you think about the word political elites, you get a kind of a vision of political party bosses, for example, or you think about people at the Democratic or Republican national conventions that like the chair of the DNC or the RNC. But when we talk about elites as we speak of it today, it's really any person who has high influence, high level of information, and high level of influence into policy and politics. Think big donors, think delegates, think highly influential voters. Political parties are strong institutions because they're not just those party bosses anymore. They're a diversity of various memberships of various groups. Think about civil rights groups, think about religious organizations, think about political action committees that are set up for the sole purpose of providing funding to elected officials so that they will get policies that are friendly to electric companies, that are friendly to steel mills, that are friendly to real estate agents, that are friendly to name your public interest group. They find themselves within political parties, and they find themselves a part of party by the very nature that they need the party in order to gain critical mass. Now, what parties do, let's talk about a little bit what parties do. They operate in three spheres. They operate within the organization, in the electorate, and in government. In the organization, they coordinate policy demanders. Some scholars argue that parties are a group of policy demanders, that they are the party elite and that they run political parties. And parties are responsible for coordinating across these policy demanding groups. To give you a good example is something we call log rolling. And log rolling across various high policy demanding areas looks like this. Think about what Strange Bedfellows Focus in the Family is. So Focus in the Family, if you're not familiar with the organization, is a Christian organization whose main mission is to instill family values, to resource families with materials that would help them to live out a Christian lifestyle within family and within community. They tend to be Christians. Christians tend to align themselves with the Republican Party. Now, think about what the Focus in the Family folks have in common with the National Rifle Association. And then think about what the National Rifle Association has in common with organizations who care about global free trade. Those three folks have nothing in common. They have no overlapping policy demand in general. You might be an individual who cares about those three things, but in general, those three policy demanders should not have anything in common as far as policy needs that overlap, but they support each other under the Republican brand. Under the Republican Party, because the Republican Party has agreed to assume the policy demands of Focus on the Family, the policy demands of the National Rifle Association, the policy demands of free trade organizations. They all come together and they support each other through supporting the Republican Party. Does that make sense? And so that's a big role that parties assume. In the electorate, political parties provide shortcuts to voters. And what I mean is this, is that you may or may not, the average voter actually doesn't do their homework about a judge or about a mayor running for office or even a Congress member running for federal Congress. But they do associate themselves often with a political party. And so rather than really vote based on individual policies or individual persons running for office, they will vote on whether or not a person is a Republican or a Democrat or part of the Green Party or a Libertarian, because they trust their party more than they trust policy, or rather understand it, and more than they trust elected officials or politicians. Political science has shown us time and time again that party identification is extremely strong and constant. We assume our party identity, whether we're Democrat or Republican or Independent or Libertarian, from our family of origin. We were socialized very young, or some of us are socialized in college. In any event, when we make that decision for ourselves to be a Republican or a Democrat or a Libertarian, we have such a strong identity with that party that social science has found that it is equivalent to how people feel about their ethnicity. So it is very unlikely for a person to change political party identity. It is more likely for them to agree to a party, to a policy that may or may not be what they're about. They'll just assume it to be something that they care about rather than change party because a particular policy within the party platform doesn't gel with their personal ideology. People are more likely to change their ideology than to change their political party. So that's how strong party is in the electorate. And the rational choice literature tells us that parties exist to get people in office, that elected officials, that politicians use the party within the electorate in order to gain power, in order to gain office. And there's science, there's empirical science that supports that politicians are more likely to also assume policies, not because they care about the policies, but because they want to get elected. And that politicians will take a position on policies that are under their party brand in order to get elected. So political parties provide incentives to both voters and politicians. In the government, parties are responsible for maintaining discipline. They maintain discipline in what Cox and McCubbins call the cartel theory. And the cartel theory is essentially this, is that the party leaders within Congress will coordinate the group in exchange for rewards or punishment. That is to say that an elected official, a Congress member, is not really at liberty to vote his or her conscience. Rather, the party takes it upon themselves to reward members who stick with party preferences, that vote along party lines, and they reward them by giving them committee seats, by giving them re-election money, endorsements, anything that their district needs. They'll put it in, they can put pork barrel addendums into an existing bill that's up for a vote in order to reward a member as long as he or she stays within the party and votes with the party on all things. The punishment is exactly the opposite of that. Any Congress member who votes their conscience or their district's need over and above the collective need of the political party will be punished by not getting supported on their policies, or their bills won't get to the floor, or they won't get money for re-election campaigns. They won't get endorsements by big leaders within the party, and they won't get placed on committees within